The beginnings of the term biodesign really came out of the biomedical field. So something like a cochlear implant, where we're really designing tissues, technologies that are biocompatible for implantation in the human body. That was actually the first definition of biodesign, so really designing biology for our bodies. It moved into energy, so thinking about biofuels, algae, for example, being used for aviation fuel, chemicals, so any kind of small molecule that could be used in industrial biotechnology. We've actually been doing this for decades. So using fermentation of a yeast cell or a bacteria to produce something like a high-value chemical. We're starting to explore it, and I think maybe this is somewhere James is going, as we think about our own microbiome. So a huge amount of research being done, looking at all of the microorganisms that live on us, around us, every surface, and how we can start to think of that rather in, not in the way that we've been doing for decades, where we've been told that we actually need to get rid of bad bacteria or these kind of negative perceptions of these microbes, to one where we actually want to work with them and understand a lot more about their role in us, on us, and everywhere around us. So we're starting to see the beginnings of a new field that is actually harnessing the microbiome and understanding what is our relationship with those living organisms and how can we really work with them rather than against them. Thinking about really the resource crunches on this planet and the fact that as more people become affluent, they want to eat meat for the first time, as well as people who are recognizing that if we all consume in the same way, it's completely unsustainable. And so we're also seeing that movement of people rejecting traditional agriculture or meat in favor of new alternatives. And this is where people are looking to biotechnology and our ability to potentially engineer and culture the proteins that we find in nature, but without needing to go to the animal. So the beginnings of cellular agriculture and a food system that doesn't require cows in fields. But actually what I want to talk about is materials. So, if we look the last few thousand years, we've really taken materials either from the natural world in the form of, cellulose and silk, plants that we could grow to extract fibers. We went to animals for things like leather or fur. And then in the 20th century, we discovered that we could actually take petrochemicals, create synthetic polymers, and that exploded into a whole new material world of plastics and synthetics. Well, I think no one here can be blind to the fact that plastics, we're now understanding, are creating a whole new world of problems. So as we think about what does the new generation of truly sustainable materials look like, people again are looking to biotechnology and thinking about how can we biodesign the best that nature has to offer, but rather than go to nature and traditional forms of agriculture, do that in a way which is actually much more efficient from the standpoint of the amount of water, energy, land, and chemistry that's needed. So all of these broadly speak to biodesign, and biodesign is not just one technology. It really does encompass many, many fields and disciplines that come together. I want to talk about biofabrication. So this is somewhat, again, edited version of the original definition of biofabrication, which once again was thought of for the body. But if we think about it with a design mindset, really all it means is we're manufacturing with biology. And as we start to have access to the tools of biotech, as designers, we're thinking about fabricating with biology for consumer products. These are kind of the new living factories, if you like. So yeast, bacteria, algae. We've actually been using some of these organisms for the longest time. But the way that we're using them now is really where it gets interesting. So we talk about two different forms of biofabrication. This is the first one. So this, in a way, is almost like the purest form. If you like, we describe it as bioassembly, where we have some living organism, it requires a nutrient, but then above that, we can just set up some growth conditions and get it to form into something that we've designed. So a really good example of this would be mycelium, where not only is the material growing, the organism is growing a material for us, it's also creating that material into a three-dimensional finished form, which we can also program in a way to give it the performance properties or the aesthetic properties that we want. But really, the organism is creating the structure, so it's actually material into structure. So it's assembling itself through a biological process. This is actually gets more complicated, there's more human involvement here, but this is biofabrication as being used more generally. So this is where we take an organism like a yeast cell, we start to edit the DNA, we get into cell engineering, screening of the cells, looking at which cells are high performing, which ones are actually reliable, and then we'll get to the point where we'll do some material science. So for example, we could take a protein like spider silk and engineer a yeast cell to be producing the spider silk, and then via a fermentation process, produce that protein, and then do some processing on that system to extract the protein, and then we can form a fiber or a material in a more traditional way using some chemistry. And then you're seeing there some potential outputs of the material. So here's a few examples. So up until 2019, we really didn't have any products on the market, but 2019 has actually been a big year. We started in January. That watch strap on the left there is a collaboration between the luxury jewelry or watch brand Omega in Switzerland, working with a German company called Amsilk. So this is the world's first spider silk watch strap, where the silk was produced in a vat, fermented, rather than from a silkworm. And these have been on sale, throughout the year. The middle one is another spider silk grown microbially from a Japanese company called Spiber, and they've collaborated with the Japanese arm of the North Face. And this jacket just went, they're having an auction for it. There are 50 that exist in the world. You can only get them in Japan, but you can buy online. They're about $1,400. But it's the world's first coming to market of this material. And I'm going to talk a bit more about that project because it's interesting to understand what it takes to bring these things to market. And then this one was a launch in the summer of an acoustic panel. So this is an example of that bioassembly that I was talking about. So this is from Mogyu, and I know that Maurizio's here in the audience, and you're going to be hearing a lot more about the way that they produce their products. So this is the emerging world of biofabricated materials that are going to change how we as consumers think about our material world. So it may be something we wear, it could be a piece of furniture. It really goes across fashion, sport, interiors, automotive, architecture. And if you're a designer, you may be thinking, well, this is all really interesting. How do I get involved in this space? You may think, do I need to get a job at a biotech company? And if so, how would I do that? Here's the bad news. Oops. There are no jobs. But let me qualify that. So it's not that there are no jobs. There are just no jobs being advertised. And this is where I think it's interesting, because our traditional education system doesn't actually yet really allow us to build the kinds of people that we need. So this is really how we see the landscape. If you think about it, at one end we have research, and the people doing research could be academic scientists, could be designers, so we can talk about students, It can also be independent design studios, people who are doing research and really exploring the space intellectually, philosophically, however. In the middle, we have people who are going straight to establishing a biotech company. And then at the extreme end here, we have consumer brands right across every vertical, from fashion to sport to automotive and so on, all of whom are looking for more sustainable materials. Here's an example. So this is Charlotte McCurdy. She's a designer who created her own material. She manufactured the material, she's prototyped material, the material's being exhibited, and really these kinds of projects are super important for raising awareness around how could we use biology or biomaterials or biofabrication to rethink the way we design and make things. And as far as I know, Charlotte's not planning to commercialize that particular material, but there are many designers who work in this way. So it's the outcome of an independent studio, but she has no essential plan to commercialize that material. Then we've got people like Callie. So Callie Clayton is a former member of my team at Modern Meadow. She studied textile design at RISD, the Rhode Island School of Design. And Callie was very deeply technical in that she knew how to knit, weave, print, really understand material structure. How do we construct a material? But she also had an interest in biodesign. So Callie decided to go off and self-educate. So she found a DIY community lab that was teaching basic lab skills and the sort of tenets of synthetic biology. And so she spent 3 months trying to get to grips with this whole new field and really supplement her design education with some biology and lab skill education. And she just happened to be a combination of skill sets that I was looking for when I started to build the design team at Modern Meadow. So we ran around all the design schools in New York looking for people for our team, and we knew that we wanted both traditional making skills as well as people who had a foundation in biodesign or lab skills. And in fact, we didn't find anyone other than at the Rhode Island School of Design. So this is definitely a kind of call to design educators to start thinking about how do we mix and educate people for this new industry. Because design alone, if you're hiring for a biotech company at least, is not going to be enough to enable you to work side by side with scientists in a lab environment. So Maurizio started off in a similar vein, had an independent design studio, started researching mycelium. I think he established his studio in 2010. He can correct me if I'm wrong. Then founded his own biotech company. So after 5 years, Moggy was launched. And then 4 years later, they launched a first mycelium product. So this bit actually looks quite fast. It is fast for a biotech company in 4 years to go from technology to product. That's very quick. But actually, for Maurizio as a person researching the field, it's been nearly a decade before he got to a product. And this is a key thing I want to talk about today. Spiber, we mentioned. So this is a company founded 2007, first prototype 2015. It actually went back into development and took another 4 years to get that jacket right. So the time frame to market was 12 years. And that is worth thinking about, because as we think about fashion today, we want it to happen in weeks. This is not biotech. Biofabricate, our team actually sits across the whole spectrum. So we work with biotech startups, consumer brands, and we can work on things which maybe only live in the world of exhibits.